stakes on the legs, so we can look at the position, territories of the males, let the males individually marked, so we can look at the differences in individual display characters. It's pretty easy to trap the birds to the left. We use drop nets or box traps, individually marked with color bands. And then a lot of the demographic data we collect by putting radio transmitters on the females. So this is a little 6 to 8 gram transmitter sort of sitting over the crop. They're VHF radios. They have a range of maybe 2 to 3 kilometers. So we can track the birds, follow them to the nest sites, and monitor them through the breeding season. So here's a result from the behavioral work we've done at Konza. And so one of the most striking things about watching these birds on the lek, the leks can be really large, up to 14 males on some of these sites. And if you sit there morning after morning and watch them, and watch who mates, the vast majority of the matings will be taken by a subset of males. So it's a peculiar thing. You look out here, here's a lek with 14 males. 10 of those males never mated in the breeding season. So, I make the parallel. I presented this before. I want to comparison to undergraduates, Farsi, and Aggie. Maybe if you're talking to school kids, you don't want to draw those comparisons. So what we've got here is the successful copulations, and then in a lot of cases, there's also unsuccessful copulations. So the female comes onto a male's territory, she starts circling, she gives a little pre-copulatory display, she sort of fans her wings and crouches, and then the male's ready, he steps on her back, and he gets clotheslined by the 3 or 4 males that are on adjacent territories. It's kind of a neat thing at a delicate moment. And then there's some cases, like where there's only a handful of disrupted populations, and then there was like 2 males that took 90% of the populations. So this has a big effect for conservation of these birds. If only a small subset of these males are mating, then that has a big effect on what the effective population size is. So if your census population is a couple hundred birds, well, in a given year, only 5% of those are mating. So it potentially leads to genetic bottlenecks. So this is one of the highlights of the behavioral work. We've done a fair bit of demographic work. So some of our sites are centered here, including Konza. We had additional sites up near Concordia, some sites in the southern foothills here. And the focus of this work was trying to look at what are the potential impacts of wind power development. So we started with 3 sites. In the end, only one of these was developed for wind power. But we've got very nice demographic data sort of across this range of different sites in the Flint Hills. So if you look at the ecology of these hens, one of the most striking things about them is they really have good reproductive potential. So if you put a radio on a female, at least 85% of them will nest. If they lose their first nest, if it's burned in a fire or it's destroyed by a predator, at least half of them will lay a re-nest. And they lay huge clutches. Average 12 eggs in the first clutch, average almost 11 eggs in the second clutch. And then if it survives until hatching, most of those eggs will produce chicks, so really good egg viability, and pretty good rates of fledging among the chicks in the nest as well. So they've got good reproductive potential. And for a declining bird, this is good because then there's good potential for populations to recover quickly. So here's the story. It's a bit discouraging. Across multiple years, across multiple sites, the thing that's driving the population declines of these birds is they have really poor nest survival. So some of the variation here, we have some differences among yearlings and adults. We have increases over the course of the season between the first nests and the re-nests. But where these nest survival rates should be would be up at the top of the screen at about 50%. Those are really depressed. The southern Flint Hills, this is one of the sites where the birds are declining most steeply. And it's like a 10 to 15% nest survival rate. here's the sites that include Konza, sort of between 10 to 20%. Even in pretty good habitats, we're still seeing these really low nest survival rates.
Do you know why that is?
We have some ideas. So if we look at the nests, so you walk up, you can tell from evidence at the nest site what the cause of failure was. So in a successful prairie chicken nest, what happens is the eggs, think of a round egg. When the chicks hatch, they kind of roll their head around inside, so you get a nice little cap that pips off the top of the egg. So a successful nest where the chicks have emerged from the eggs, you can just look and see, well, this one's got a little pipped cap, and you can kind of actually match them up and look at how many eggs have hatched. If it's destroyed by a predator, then the eggshell remnants are a very different shape, so they're kind of smashed like this. And it's pretty clear that most of our nests were destroyed by predators. So one of my students did some nest capture, and she captured 25 nest predation nests. So here's some of the most important ones. This is a gopher snake, also called a bull snake, a really large constrictor. It can be 4 or 5 feet length and really large. So we had a few cases where we've got some terrific videos. The snake's basically facing the camera, eating eggs. Mid-sized predators like skunks. There's the nose of a skunk with the stripe. We had some skunks. We had some badgers. A bit surprising, we had no raccoons. I think the raccoons are more tightly associated with water, and these are mostly birds nesting in the Untitled Prairie. This one, maybe a little puzzling. This long nose, black tip. So we had to look for reference photos to try and identify this animal. So this is about 2/3 of our nest predation events, our coyotes that are taking eggs. Yeah. And sometimes, and I think we have at least one record of the hen also being killed on the nest.
Sir, you don't have any kit foxes here, do you?
No.
They're all west.
They're mostly western Kansas. There are red foxes in this area. We didn't ever report them. And there's pretty strong competition between coyotes and red foxes. So the other place I've seen red foxes is sort of been on the edge in Manhattan. They're sort of displaced by the coyotes. Coyote numbers are really good. Okay. So the story, if we're looking at these nesting hens, is one where what seems to be driving the population losses are these high rates of nest failure that's driven by predation. The challenge for these females when they're selecting a nest site is they're looking for areas with cover to basically avoid the predators. But then the challenge for a hen that's hiding in the grass is her eye looking this way, there's her body. If she selects really heavy cover like this, potentially she also has trouble detecting an approaching predator. So if we look at the survival rates of females, it's actually opposite to what we see for the fecundity rates. So in the southerly site where we had the really low nest survival, we actually have really high female survival. And over here in the Smoky Hills, where the productivity was good, we've got really low rates of female survival. And this trade-off is basically showing the females are also vulnerable to predation during the incubation period. And most of the losses, if we look at the carcasses, they're mostly during the breeding season, and like the nests, mostly losses to the male predators. So that's sort of what's going on with prairie chickens. A lot of they're in decline in the Flint Hills. That's what the State Wildlife Agency and monitoring data show. And what our studies have shown is that what the demographics that are driving those declines are basically the females are vulnerable during incubation, they're vulnerable when they're attending broods, and then the low productivity as well. Here's another species I've done a fair bit of work with. This is the pumpkin sandpiper. This bird has two vocalizations you might hear. When it gets up and just sort of flies, or sometimes when you're out at night during migration, there's a little two-note call, kind of a boot. That's not the one, sorry. Boot. That little squeak. This just sounds like a little worried squeak. The call that the birds do when they display is a thing we call the wolf whistle. So that's this one. Think of like a construction worker hanging out. Maybe be a little bit rude. And as it turns out, if we can't determine the sex of these birds just looking at the morphology, but we've done molecular sexing where we've collected a blood sample and sexed them, and it is only the males that get displayed so much gold. So we call that the wolf whistle. So it's still a little bit early. They're probably not back yet, but I think that's a real sign of spring in the prairie. They start to get things.
Brett, you haven't mentioned cats in the urban fringe. I just think cats have got to play a role in this decline for all these nesting, grassland nesting birds in our neighborhood. You know, there's a lot of acres and a lot of wonderful prairie, but they're free-range cats.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite true for the prairie fragments that are close to town. Out on Konza, there's not much of an issue.
Coyotes eat cats.
They sure do.
They sure do.
I don't think feral cats would last too long in the prairie. So let me change gears a little bit. Okay, so we'll talk about sandpipers. Here's a grassland bird that has very similar habitats to the prairie chicken. It's a ground nesting bird. It's looking for areas, tall grass for concealment. But this is a migratory species. So breeding here in the Great Plains. There's another population up in Alaska, but then it's migrant. So it's only here for roughly 3 months of the season, and then it's wintering in southern South America. So we've worked with them here on Konza, and I've also spent 4 winters working with this bird down in Uruguay, in the northwestern portion of the country here. And the goal with this research has been to try and break up the annual cycle, try and understand what are the components of survivorship during breeding and non-breeding. Can we estimate the survivorship during migration? So another point I wanted to leave with, when you think about a lot of these migratory birds, they're going to be very different than the rest of the birds, like the prairie chickens and the demography, because they have really low reproductive potential. Usually they only lay 1 clutch. These upland sandpipers almost always lay 4 eggs. They've got pretty good chick viability. We know about half of those are male, half of those are female, and then they come back as yearlings to breed. We know that from color marking the chicks.